Hello, thanks for joining me today. Today I want to talk a little bit about photography and how to understand your camera. So a lot of us love taking photos, but sometimes it seems a little daunting with all the buttons and the settings. So I just wanted to go over some of the foundations of photography so that you could understand how to take better photos. So the first thing I want to go over is how to hold your camera. So you want to provide it with a stable foundation so that there's no movement when you take the photo. Sometimes when you take the photo, when you push down to take it, it will move the camera. So you want to make sure that you're holding it in a certain way so it doesn't have any movement or camera shake, because that movement will show up in your photo. So what you do is you put your arm against your side and then just rest your lens in this hand, and this hand can adjust the lens, where this hand controls all the settings and takes the photo. So our cameras are usually on automatic, and that allows the camera to change the settings on its own. But there are certain times when you want to have control of how your photo looks. So if you take it off automatic mode, there are certain settings that you need to be aware of. So photography is essentially capturing light and how light reflects off of an image. So with exposure, there is 3 things that you have to have in perfect balance to get a good photo, and that's shutter speed, aperture or f-stop, and ISO. So shutter speed is kind of like a curtain. So on bright days, you just want to open it quickly and let a little bit of light in. And when it's darker out, you can leave it open a little longer and take a look and see what's outside. So that's essentially what shutter speed is. If it's bright, you want to have a fast shutter speed. And if you have a fast shutter speed, first it lets less light into the camera, but it also will capture movement. So when you're taking a picture of someone walking past, if you have a fast shutter speed, it will stop the motion. If you have a slow shutter speed, it's going to be blurry. But that can also be used to your advantage. So let's take an example of a waterfall. So if you have a fast shutter speed, you're going to see all the little droplets in the waterfall. But if you have a slow shutter speed, it's going to look misty. It's going to, the water will look like smoke coming down the rocks. So you can use it to your advantage. So fast shutter speed would be used in bright light, and slow shutter speed would be used in low light. Slow shutter speed is also good when you want to take pictures of traffic at night. You get trails of light. You can also take a picture of stars at night, and it looks like the stars are like there's light streaks across the sky. And for that kind of photo, you have the shutter open for a couple of minutes. So if you're holding the camera for a couple of minutes, you're eventually going to move, just so slightly. So for slow shutter speeds, you will need to have a tripod. So we talked a little bit about shutter speed and how you can adjust the shutter speed for different conditions. So exposure is like a perfect balance. The shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO, they're like a triangle. So if you adjust one, it's going to create an imbalance. So you need to make adjustments in the other aspects of that triangle. So shutter speed is kind of like the eyelid, where it opens up and lets light in. Aperture is more like the iris. So it is the opening behind the lens. So it controls how much light gets in as well. And aperture is shown as an f-stop. It's called f-stop. So it's a fraction. So if you have like a f4, it is larger than an f22 because a quarter is larger than 1/22. So if you have a small fraction, it lets less light in. So on a bright day, you want just a tiny hole, so you use a small f-stop. And one thing about f-stop is that it impacts the depth of field in a photo. So if you have a small f-stop or a small aperture, your foreground and background are both going to be sharp. So you're going to be able to see both very clearly. Now, if you use a large aperture, you're going to have a very clear image, but the background will be blurry. So that's really good if you want to do a photo of a person and you want to have the focus right on the person and not have the eye wander and look at the background. So that is aperture or f-stop. So the third aspect of the exposure triangle is called ISO. And what the ISO is it's a sensor that captures the image. So it's very sensitive to absorbing light, and you can control how sensitive that sensor is by controlling the ISO number. So if you have a high ISO, it's going to make the sensor more sensitive to light, so it will absorb more light. If you have a low ISO, then you're not going to absorb as much light, so your image will be darker. Now, on a sunny day, if you use a high ISO, your picture will be overexposed because it's absorbing too much light, and you're not going to be able to see your image. But one of the problems with ISO, and it's actually very interesting if you want your picture to have this texture, is with a high ISO, your picture will look very grainy. It captures the image a certain way that it looks like it's made up of a whole bunch of different dots. It's not clear at all. So if you don't want the picture to be grainy, you can use a high ISO in a dark setting, but then you'll have to adjust other things so that it won't be grainy. So now that we've gone over the exposure triangle, I hope you understand what the settings mean and how they all work together. So if you adjust one of the settings, then you need to accommodate and adjust the other settings to create that balance that's been disrupted by changing one of them. So I just wanted to go over some of the rules and some of the issues you may have in photography. So sometimes when you take photos, they don't always work or you don't like them. So a lot of photographers will do what's called spray and pray, where they take a whole bunch of photos of one subject at the same time and hope that a couple of them work out. So they take 100 photos, they may only have 5 that work or 5 that they like, where they're not out of focus or the lighting's not doing funny things, or that's totally normal to have issues with your photos. So some of the rules that I want to go over today, one of them is called rules of thirds. So the rule of thirds means that the photo is broken up into thirds. So for example, if you want to take a picture of a mountain, then 2/3 of the photo will be mountain and 1/3 will be sky. Or it could be 1/3 of the photo is mountain, 2/3 of the photo is sky. So you don't want the photo to be half mountain, half sky. It works better if it works within the rule of thirds. Now, another thing that a lot of people do is when they take pictures of, say, people, they put the image right in the center of the photo. It is a little more interesting if you just offset the person just slightly so they're not right in the middle. That could even work in the rule of thirds where the image is in a third of the photo and then 2/3 is the blank space. But yeah, you don't want the image right in the center. Just offset it just a little bit, just to add more interest. So there is an ideal time to take a photo. Now, if you take a picture at noon, when the sun is the brightest and right above you, it's very intense. You're gonna have people squinting. The light is very strong and extreme, and it's not very flattering. But there is 2 times of the day that is ideal. It's called the golden hour, and it's 1 hour after the sun rises and 1 hour after the sun sets. And in that time, the shadows are longer, the colors are richer, you have kind of like a golden hue. It's really beautiful. So we'll put up a photo so you can see what the photos look like during that time. So the golden hour is the best time to take photos. So after you've taken the photos, your photos will be in a raw format, so the colors will be dull. It is worth the time to put in a photo editor and edit the colors and enhance the lighting. You're going to have a richer looking photo overall. It doesn't have to be Photoshop, that is the most common editing program, but something that will help you to make those adjustments in your photos. So if you want to learn more about photography, the library has an amazing resource. So if you go onto the library website and if you go onto the e-resources, one of the e-resources that they have is called lynda.com, and they have many courses on photography and editing your photos, Photoshop, even how to take pictures with your camera phone. So I encourage you to go on to that e-resource. They have amazing programs on there. So I hope you like this intro to cameras. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.